Chapter 27b. As the golden summer changed into the deep golden autumn, he went to the lake of Como. There he found the loveliness of a dream. He spent his days upon the crystal blueness of the lake, or he walked back into the soft, thick verdure of the hills and tramped until he was tired so that he might sleep. But by this time he had begun to sleep better, he knew, and his dreams had ceased to be a terror to him. Perhaps, he thought, my body is growing stronger. It was growing stronger, but because of the rare peaceful hours when his thoughts were changed, his soul was slowly growing stronger too. He began to think of Misselthwaite and to wonder if he should not go home. Now and then he wondered vaguely about his boy, and he asked himself what he should feel when he went and stood by the carved bed and looked down at the sharply chiseled ivory white face while it slept, and the black lashes rimmed so startlingly the close-shut eyes. He shrank from it. One marvel of a day, he had walked so far that when he returned the moon was high and full, and all the world was purple shadow and silver. The stillness of lake and shore and wood were so wonderful that he did not go into the villa that he lived in. He walked down to the little bowered terrace at the water's edge, and he sat upon a seat, and he breathed in all the heavenly scents of the night. He felt the strange calmness stealing over him, and it grew deeper and deeper until he fell asleep. He did not know when he fell asleep and when he began to dream. His dream was so real that it did not feel as if he were dreaming. He remembered afterwards how intensely wide awake and alert he had thought that he was. He thought that as he sat there and breathed in the scent of the late roses and listened to the lapping of the water at his feet, that he had heard a voice calling. It was a sweet and clear and happy and far away voice. It seemed very far, but he heard it as distinctly as if it had been at his very side. "Archie! Archie! Archie!" it said, and then again, sweeter and clearer than before, "Archie! Archie!" And he thought he sprang to his feet, not even startled. It was such a real voice, and it seemed so natural that he should hear it. "Lilias! Lilias!" he answered. "Lilias, where are you?" "In the garden." It came back like a sound from a golden flute. "In the garden." And then the dream ended, but he did not waken. He slept soundly and sweetly all through that lovely night. When he did awake at last, it was a brilliant morning, and a servant was standing, staring at him. He was an Italian servant, and was accustomed, as all the servants of the villa were, to accepting without question any strange thing his foreign master might do. No one ever knew when he would go out, or when he would come in, or where he would choose to sleep, or if he would roam about the garden, or lie in a boat in the lake all night. The man held a salver with some letters on it, and he waited quietly until Mr. Craven took them. When he had gone away, Mr. Craven sat a few moments holding them in his hand and looking at the lake. His strange calm was still upon him, and something more, a lightness, as if the cruel thing which had been done had not happened as he thought, as if something had changed. He was remembering the dream, the real dream. "In the garden," he said, wondering at himself. "In the garden, but the door is locked, and the key is buried deep." When he glanced at the letters a few minutes later, he saw that the one on top of the rest was an English letter, and it came from Yorkshire. It was directed in a plain woman's hand, but it was not a hand he knew. He opened it, scarcely thinking of the writer, but the first words attracted his attention at once. Dear Sir, I am Susan Sowerby, that made bold to speak to you once on the moor. It was about Miss Mary I spoke, and I would make bold to speak again. Please, sir, I would come home if I were you. I think you would be glad to come, and if you will excuse me, sir, I think your lady would ask you to, if she were here. Your obedient servant, Susan Sowerby. Mr. Craven read the letter twice before he put it back in his envelope, and he kept thinking about the dream. I will go back to Misselthwaite, he said. I'll go at once. And he went through the garden to the villa and ordered Pritchard to prepare for his return to England. In the first days he was in Yorkshire again, and on his long railroad journey, he found himself thinking of his boy as he had never thought in all the 10 years past. During those years he had only wished to forget him. Now, though, he did not intend to think about him. Memories of him constantly drifted into his mind. He remembered the black days when he had raved like a madman because the child was alive and the mother was dead. And he had refused to see it. And when he had gone to look at it at last, it had been such a weak and wretched thing that everyone had been sure that it would die in a few days. But to the surprise of those who took care of it, the days passed and it lived, and everyone believed it would be a deformed and crippled creature. He had not meant to be a bad father, but he had not felt like a father at all. He had supplied doctors and nurses and luxuries, but he had shrunk from the mere thought of the boy and had buried himself in his own misery. The first time after years' absence, he returned to Misselthwaite, and the small, miserable-looking thing languidly and indifferently lifted his face and the great gray eyes with black lashes round them, so like and yet so horribly unlike the happy eyes that he had adored. He could not bear the sight of them, and he turned away, pale as death. After that he scarcely ever saw him except when he was asleep, and all he knew of him was that he was a confirmed invalid with a vicious, hysterical, half-insane temper. He could only be kept from furies dangerous to himself by being given his own way in every detail. All this was not an uplifting thing to recall, but as the train whirled him through the mountain passes and golden plains, the man who was coming alive again began to think in a new way, and he thought long and steadily and deeply. Perhaps I have been all wrong for 10 years, he said to himself. 10 years is a long time. It may be too late to do anything, quite too late. What have I been thinking of? Of course, this was the wrong magic to begin by saying too late. Even Colin could have told him that, but he knew nothing of magic, either black or white. This he had yet to learn. He wondered if Susan Sowerby had taken courage and written to him only because the motherly creature had realized that the boy was much worse, was fatally ill. If he had not been under the spell of the curious calmness which had taken possession of him, he would have been more wretched than ever. But the calm had brought a sort of courage and hope with it. Instead of giving way to thoughts of the worst, he actually found he was trying to believe in better things. Could it be possible that she sees that I may be able to do him some good and control him? He thought. I will go and see her on my way to Misselthwaite. But when, on his way across the moor, he stopped at the carriage at the cottage, 7 or 8 children who were playing about gathered in a group and bobbing 7 or 8 friendly and polite curtsies. They told him that their mother had gone to the other side of the moor early in the morning to help a woman who had had a new baby. Our deacon, they volunteered, was over at the manor working in one of the gardens where he went several days a week. Mr. Craven looked over the collection of sturdy little bodies and round, red-cheeked faces, each one grinning in its own particular way, and he awoke to the fact that they were a healthy and likable lot. He smiled at their friendly grins, and he took a golden sovereign from his pocket, and he gave it to our Lisbeth Ellen, who was the oldest. "If you divide that into 8 parts, there will be half a crown for each of you," he said. Then, amid grins and chuckles and bobbing of curtsies, he drove away, leaving ecstasy and nudging elbows and little jumps of joy behind. The drive across the wonderfulness of the moor was a soothing thing. Why did it seem to give him a sense of homecoming when he had been sure he could never feel again? That sense of beauty of land and sky and purple bloom of distance, and a warming of the heart at drawing nearer to the great old house which had held those of his blood for 600 years. How he had driven away from it the last time, shuddering to think of its closed doors and the boy lying in the bed with the brocade hangings. Was it possible that perhaps he might find him changed a little for the better, and that he might overcome his shrinking from him? How real that dream had been, how wonderful and clear the voice which had called to him. In the garden, in the garden. "I will try to find the key," he said. "I will try to open the door. I must, though I don't know why."